All right. Welcome back to Readings Fly Shop. Thought I'd do a little brief outline on fly lines. We covered sinking leaders, sinking leaders, sinking heads, and sinking fly lines. We'll talk a little bit about floating fly lines, the standard industry standard. We've got basically three different types of coatings. Most fly lines are made out of PVC, polyvinyl chlorides. So these are PVC lines here. All of these are PVC lines. Still the standard in the industry. Now within a PVC line you have different tapers. One of the things that came out of these lines years ago by an English company was a low stretch core, meaning the core didn't stretch too much. And that's a kind of an interesting thing. It gives you a little more energy. It takes kind of the bungee cord effect out of casting. So these in-touch lines, or these low stretch core lines, set the hook a little easier. They came in really handy on bigger, heavier fly lines because you didn't have much stretch in them. A little more immediate hook set, gave you a little more power when you cast. But again, PVC lines. Well, there's a polyurethane line out here by another company. They decided to get away from PVC. Great company called Rio, or Airflow, I'm sorry. Rio has their standard fly line, and then SA's out there. And you've got some tapers like the triangle taper, the weight forward, the double taper. These line tapers are basically a modification of a weight forward line, where it starts out thin, gets fatter and thicker, and then tapers down. There's one unique line that came out on the market many years ago called a triangle taper. Now they're pretty neat because it's like a weight forward line that has a continuous tapered head. It's a weight forward line. Starts out thin, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it drops off real quick. That's why it's called a triangle taper. It's like a cone. It should be probably called a cone taper. That line's been out since the mid-'80s, and I've been carrying it ever since then. And it's a great line for roll casting, for dry fly fishing. I don't care too much for it when I'm throwing weighted flies, but it is a great dry fly line. It's a great line for roll casting up to about 40, 45 feet. There's some other lines out there called long bellies. They're a weight forward line that has a longer head on them, and they're kind of a little bit of a blend, but need not the capacity necessary to put on a double taper line, because double taper lines are what we used to fish with a lot in years past. And I'm telling you right now, a double taper line is a great line to fish with. Now some people have the illusion, and maybe so, they can cast more distance with a weight forward. What most people cast distance with a weight forward is they whack the line out there. They don't cast. Double taper lines have good line control when they're on the water. So what is a double taper? It starts out thin on one end, gets thick, runs all the way to the other, and tapers down. So there's an economics to double taper. You can switch around and use the other end of it. But there's something else a double taper line can offer. I prefer double taper lines on softer action rods like glass and bamboo. I think they cast smoother without the hinging effect of the weight forward head shooting out. Weight forward lines have been known and used by lots of people as shooting heads. In other words, a heavy head pulls the thin line behind it. There's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of people get aggressive on their forward cast with the weight forward line so they can shoot the line. And they fail to cast properly. They get aggressive when the head gets out and they whack on the line. And I think in some cases it maybe limits their ability to cast smoothly because they get their distance by a concerted effort of punching the line harder, which creates a casting problem down the road we'll talk about. We'll talk about that today. I'll throw that down the road, what's called a tailing loop and why they occur. So you have weight forward lines in different configurations. You have your double taper line. There's one I left out of there because very few people get it. It's a level line. Probably nothing wrong with it. It's the same diameter all the way through. I always say it's like casting a clothesline. It doesn't give you any taper. It's kind of clunky on the water. But in some cases, if you just don't want to spend much money, you don't find too many of them. And there's no quality level lines out there. You could put a butt section on a level line and taper it down and take some of the energy off the end of it. But the tapered lines are, by most people's standards, what most people want to go with. There is a new line out there. This is an interesting line. I've carried this thing on and off for years. It's called Monic. It's very interesting. There's a brand new line called the icicle taper. It's almost like a fusiform taper. It comes out like this, tapers up and tapers off. This line is neither polyurethane nor PVC. He doesn't tell me what it is. He's a very interesting guy. I've dealt with this guy many years on and off. It's an American-made line made in Boulder, Colorado. And this line is brand new. I've been playing with it. It's very slick. It's a very, very interesting line. I haven't had time to play with it, but I've had it on a pond a few times I've cast. It's a very thin running line behind it. Has a relatively low stretch core on one of them. His impacts are very low stretch. This has a moderate stretch line core to it. But so far I'm very impressed with this line. So if you come by here to Readings Fly Shop, I'll give you a full dissertation of fly line tapers and what you would want to use most of them for. In roll casting, we need a continuous taper, one I didn't discuss, which is a triangle taper that is on steroids, and it's called a delta taper. It's a longer head than a typical triangle. Let's give triangle taper credit for a continuous weight forward head. They're the ones that came up with it. But in recent years, some people have taken this line, copied it, and made the head longer. Now, the delta taper to me gives you a little more distance for roll casting because the head's a little bit longer. All of these fly lines can be utilized and tried on the pond. There's one feature I want to emphasize. It puts me at odds sometimes with the industry. Doesn't bother me too much to speak my mind. I'm hoping the customer will benefit. Most fly rods, not all, would be better served with a heavier line. I said most, not all. I generally throw this out because one unique feature this shop has always had: try before you buy. If you don't agree with me, that's okay. Come in and teach me something. I'm always an open-minded person. But if you come by this shop and you have a rod that needs a new line, I absolutely guarantee you, I'll ask you half a dozen questions on how you fish. We'll take that line out on the pond and we will cast it, and I will fine-tune your line to your rod, to your fishing situations. If the person selling you a fly line does not have a casting pond out front, then you tell me how you're going to catch fish if there's no water involved in it. I'm going to tell you one thing for certain. There isn't a shred of doubt in my mind that if you want to see how your rod and your line work, put it on the water and pull it off the water. That's the only way to know how a fly line and a fly rod work together. Come by readings and we'll discuss this. We'll take it down the pond, and I think you'll find it to be very interesting and very informative. Have a great day.